It's coming up to the end of 2022 and it's freaking cold outside, so I thought I would go and sit on my hot rock and do a wrap up on the state of the project and predictions for 2023. Sadly, the car is way behind schedule. It's been held up by one factor that I never considered in my project plan or risk assessment, that it's actually been almost impossible to pay anyone to do anything job-wise on the car or supply specialist parts. I've had a fair amount of my time wasted this year, and this has left me to insource as much of the work as possible, which, as you can imagine, puts a significant load on my time. On the plus side, funding has changed significantly, and this means the project can now be fully realised. It has also had the effect of opening up aspects of the project that I couldn't justify in my previous budget, so therefore once again the time span has increased, as has the workload. Nice problems to have, I suppose. Over the next few months I want to produce some more videos on the individual systems as I reintegrate them back onto the chassis. But before I do that, I want to go over the chassis itself and highlight some of the work that's been done this year. So here's the chassis, and as you can see it's been fully restored with just a few bits left to clean up and rub down. As the chassis is never likely going to be as accessible like this ever again, I decided to give it the special treatment. I had three options here: to have the chassis regalvanised, cathodic dip coated, or to paint it. Firstly, I ruled out having the structure zinc coated again, as the process can warp the chassis if it's not done correctly. Although thorough, in a few years we'll just be back to exactly the same condition as I started with, as the zinc slowly oxidises and leaves a horrible rough surface finish. There is not much wrong with the 33-year-old coating currently on the car, so I chose not to re-roll the dice and remove it. The cost of rezinking is also pretty expensive, and with the luck that I've been having recently, the potential for it to go wrong just wasn't worth it. I couldn't get any answers about cathodic coating in the UK, so this option kind of died off pretty quickly. However, the advantages of this protective coating is that it doesn't introduce any heat into the process, so no warping can occur. It also has superior anti-corrosion properties and is used in modern day manufacturing. The images shown are of Mike Seckinger's Esprit V8 GT1 project, who is the only person I know to have done this. So I was kind of left with the painting option. Excuse the slideshow here, but paint spraying, rubbing dust and video cameras don't mix very well. The plus side to this process is that you can do it yourself, as I am now getting very used to doing. It can easily be repaired when chipped or if the chassis needs modifying, and also it's really cost effective. One other thing is you can use it to fill in small panel gaps which would otherwise accumulate moisture and start to corrode inside the metal folds. Whilst the chassis is in overall superb condition, and this hasn't really happened, now I can say it never will. Researching the correct coating, carrying out various application trials, rubbing down and so on took a few months to complete, but here we are and the result is pretty good. The coating I chose to use is called EM121, which is a two-part epoxy coating. After turning the garage into a scene from American Psycho, I applied a brush base coat to ensure I got it into everywhere I needed to get to, and also to get good coverage on the edges. This was rubbed back and flattened before spraying the final coat. I've never experienced a paint that grabs like this. The adhesion is truly next level. Even on polished metal and unkeyed surfaces, it is extremely difficult to remove. If you have the correct surface preparation, you just can't chip this paint off. In fact, you have to be very careful where you get it. I'm looking forward to seeing how it holds up over the next few years. The only area I didn't paint was inside of the tunnel for obvious reasons. It's also very difficult to get to and pretty pointless. What I have done though is use a product called XCP, which is like WD-40 on steroids, and it prevents any moisture build-up inside of the backbone. This work now locks the chassis down. It is extremely unlikely to ever need anti-corrosion treatment ever again. The steel work is now wiped clean and the coating will hopefully last a long time. Okay, back to some video footage. Once the chassis was painted and fully cured, the ancillaries could then be fitted. All new grommets and edge trims were used, and all the through tunnel pipework was replaced. The smaller pipes at the bottom are for the in-car heater and charge cooler systems. I chose to do these myself at a fraction of the cost from Lotus parts by building myself a little bead roller. The larger main coolant pipes were in a pretty bad way. They run either side of the gear lever translator, and as you can see, it's rubbed a groove into the aluminium sidewall where they are specially formed to go around the linkage. It was pretty close to bursting through, if I'm honest, and it would have been a pretty nasty surprise if that had gone in the middle of a nice spirited drive, shooting boiling coolant everywhere and a guaranteed breakdown. So this is something you might want to check on your own car if you get the opportunity. Next up, I replaced the old rusty steel fuel crossover pipe with a nice stainless steel one. Again, I wasn't going to pay £70 for this, so the best I could do was £20 and another DIY beading tool. Lastly, I fitted the steering rack. What a nightmare this has been. I initially wanted to strip it down for painting and inspecting, but as I was undoing the rod end arms, I noticed that the threads were getting tighter and tighter. There was nothing I could do but to continue to unwind them as they mashed themselves up. Even though I had taken out the nut locking pins, the numpty who worked on this in the past had drilled the pinhole right into the male threads of the rack bar, which is great until you want to service the item and it smashes the threads and ruins the whole thing. This thread is what keeps the car's wheels pointing in the right direction when going around a corner at 80 miles an hour on a circuit, so it had to be replaced. I finally located a professional steering rack company who would look at it for me, and I sent all the bits off to them and asked them to simply supply a new rack bar and coupling nuts. I told them I was going to rebuild it myself and also make a video for it. What they did, however, is send the rack back to me in one piece in the hope that I wouldn't inspect it, by telling me that I would void the warranty if I did. That was a huge red flag to me, and I immediately did what they didn't want me to do and took it all apart again. When I got inside, I found that they had not done what I've asked them to do and had actually used the old parts and then charged me for them, to which I promptly took legal action. And people wonder why I do everything myself. After sorting it all out, I rebuilt the rack again, although this time I was too drained to film it all. The plan is to keep an eye out for another rack and use this as an interim all the time, keeping a very close eye on things. It's always good to have options. If I can find a company to do business with who wants to sell me an aftermarket rack, then all the better, but I have already tried and I couldn't get any answers. I did carry out one modification, however, and that was to replace the pinion axle bearing with a tapered roller bearing. This provides some thrust load into the pinion and should make the rack feel a lot smoother under load. A final note to this: if you're going to prevent the ball joint and locking nuts from working loose, do not drill it. Instead, pin it over like this. Use red Loctite or a tabbed washer. Anything but drilling into the thread. I have been told otherwise, but I just do not accept that this is good engineering practice, because it just isn't. So what's next for 2023? The immediate action is to get the body and chassis back together. For this to happen, the chassis has to be fully finished and able to move on all four wheels, so it can be transported back to where the shell is located. I've got a few machining jobs left to do on the suspension, which has been plagued with delays. So much so, I'm actually having to get very basic items shipped in from the States. Finally, the gear lever aperture modification needs implementing. This is going to be a pretty in-depth separate video, but it needs a fair amount of research to get done. To give you a teaser, I'm thinking of getting a sheet steel saddle bonded to the backbone to serve as a reinforcing plate for a detachable cover, similar to what Lotus did in the later Esprits, but without any welding. The reason being is that once you start welding, you start to burn off the zinc coating, so I'm hoping this no weld solution works. If you'd like to know more about this little side project, have a look at the FEA study video that I made a few months back looking at the chassis torsional rigidity. Link is up in the top right. Before the body can go back on, it needs to be fully prepared and painted on the inside. This means taking off all the fittings, the glass, heat shields, etc., so that I have a completely bare shell. Then I can get in and sand back all the imperfections on the fiberglass and cut out the front section to accommodate the new cooling system. Again, expect a video on this later, probably in the late spring. As you can see from the cab model, I've been busy tracing the inside of the car. Again, I was let down by a company. I wanted to 3D scan the body, so I had to go old school. This tracing was done so I can get ready to design the safety cage. I still haven't fully finalised the designs yet, but we're getting pretty close. All the time I haven't been able to work on the car, I've been at the design desk, so probably not too much time has been wasted here. So the end goal for 2023 is to get the car completely ready for the brakes and engine. The brakes I'm all sorted, the engine is still a major issue. Whilst I know what I'm doing, you can easily drop the ball here and flush thousands of pounds down the drain if you don't get a second opinion. What I'd like to do is work with a company to develop the engine to my requirements. So if anyone has a lot of experience with these engines and wants to earn some money, give me a shout. Chaps, I am sorry for the lack of video footage on this episode. The lack of progress has really knocked it out of me over the later half of this year. But I've learned a lot about timescales and that's lowered my expectations somewhat. So we're all good now. Next year I really want to invest in a 360-degree camera as well to get some much better footage. One of the things I've found is sighting a point and shoot camera on a one-off take is really stressful and can lead to mistakes. So for a lot of this year, I've just left the camera out of things to try and get on. As always, thanks for watching and I hope to have some new content soon.